Well, my goodness, I noticed something this morning that came across my Twitter feed, and it was ESPN bragging about WNBA ratings for the WNBA season.
The WNBA is staring down a crisis it can no longer ignore. After months of hype about growth and surging popularity, the numbers now tell a very different story. One that league officials and ESPN would rather keep hidden. Ratings are collapsing at record speed. Attendance is thinning out. And for the first time in years, whispers about television partners pulling the plug are growing louder.
The WNBA and the Indiana Fever did not want people to know that Caitlin Clark was going to be out for the season. I can tell you, from the very day that they decided to let that go public, everything has dropped off a cliff.
Disney, Amazon, and even ESPN have poured millions into broadcasting rights. But with viewership hitting rock bottom, those deals may no longer be safe.
The television ratings, the interest, Thanos snapped out of existence.
What was once painted as a new era of women's basketball is suddenly being exposed as fragile, shaky, and dangerously dependent on a single star. And now, as reality sets in, the future of WNBA television rights may be hanging by a thread. But how did it all get this bad? And why so quickly?
People were trying to hang on to the possibility this whole time. Look, so many people stayed engaged with the team because they thought the cavalry was coming. She's coming back. We're going to have a fighting chance to win the WNBA championship.
The cracks in the WNBA's carefully crafted image didn't appear overnight. For months, ESPN and league officials were loudly celebrating so-called record ratings, boasting about how women's basketball had finally arrived on the big stage. But the truth is, those numbers were not sustainable, and the evidence was there all along. Nearly every major spike in viewership was tied directly to one name, Caitlin Clark. When she played, the ratings jumped into the millions. When she didn't, the numbers collapsed into the hundreds of thousands, sometimes even below that.
Most televised WNBA game on ESPN networks in history, 2.7 million viewers. Chicago Sky at Indiana Fever. Guess what? Caitlin Clark played and had a triple-double in that game against the Sky and Angel Reese. That's why that game did a rating that big.
This dependency on a single rookie was a warning sign the league chose to ignore, and now that reality has caught up. The entire foundation looks shaky. Think back to the heavily promoted Fever vs. Sky game earlier in the season. When Clark put up a triple-double against Angel Reese, that matchup drew nearly 2.7 million viewers, a figure ESPN bragged about for weeks. It was framed as proof of the WNBA's growth, proof that fans were embracing women's basketball on a national level. But peel back the layers, and what you really see is a one-off event powered almost entirely by Clark's magnetism. As soon as the season confirmed her injury and the news spread she wouldn't return, viewership cratered. A Chicago Sky game without her struggled to reach even 90,000 viewers. That's not growth, that's collapse.
80-66, Chicago Sky. This was the game where Angel Reese was suspended for the first half and then decided not to play in the second half due to back tightness, whatever we're calling it. Guys, that game drew less than 100,000 viewers.
This is where the WNBA's problem becomes clear. Networks like Disney and Amazon didn't sign on to cover the league out of charity. They invested because they believed they were tapping into a booming market with reliable ratings growth. Advertisers were promised millions of eyes on broadcasts, not a fan base that evaporates when one star disappears. For executives negotiating billion-dollar media deals, that kind of volatility is a nightmare. Why would ESPN or Amazon continue pumping money into a product so fragile that one player's absence wipes out nearly 3/4 of its viewership? And it's not just the numbers on television. Attendance tells the same story. The Fever's game against the Mystics in Baltimore saw nearly 3,000 ticket holders simply not show up. Think about that.
The Indiana Fever versus the Mystics, the game I was talking about, with 3,000 less seats, only 270,000 people tuned into that game.
Fans paid money, but the moment they realized Clark wouldn't be on the floor, they didn't even bother walking into the arena. Empty seats are bad enough, but empty seats that were already paid for reveal something deeper. Fans aren't invested in the league. They're invested in one player. Without her, there's no incentive to show up, no reason to care. For Kathy Engelbert and the WNBA leadership, this is the nightmare scenario. They sold a vision of collective growth, a league full of stars ready to break into the mainstream. What the ratings and attendance prove, however, is that the success of women's basketball at this level is alarmingly narrow. One injury, one absence, one downturn in Caitlin Clark's career, and the whole house of cards starts shaking. But the bigger question now looms: how long will the TV networks tolerate this kind of instability before they walk away?
Why we didn't find out about Caitlin Clark to the bitter end of the season. She's gone. Nobody gives a shit. Their ratings went straight down the toilet.
The television networks have always been the lifeblood of professional sports. Without those lucrative broadcast deals, leagues struggle to fund operations, market their stars, and expand their reach. For decades, the NBA, NFL, and MLB thrived because networks like ESPN, ABC, Fox, and now even streaming giants like Amazon poured billions into long-term contracts. The WNBA hoped to ride that same wave. But here's the catch. Those leagues proved they could deliver consistent audiences year after year. The WNBA, on the other hand, has shown that its numbers are anything but reliable. And now, with ratings plunging to record lows, the very foundation of those TV partnerships is at risk. Think about how this looks from a business perspective. Disney owns ESPN, and when they look at their sports programming lineup, they have to ask themselves, which products bring the best return? Monday Night Football consistently pulls in tens of millions. NBA Finals games can still command massive audiences globally. Even niche sports like college softball or women's gymnastics often outperform a WNBA regular season game. So when the WNBA offers games that barely scratch 100,000 viewers, it's not hard to see why executives might question whether the investment is worth it. Amazon faces a similar dilemma. They entered the live sports world aggressively, securing Thursday Night Football rights and dabbling in global soccer broadcasts. For a company that thrives on massive numbers and subscriber engagement, the WNBA's ratings collapse is a flashing red warning sign. If the average game can't draw more than a fraction of what one Caitlin Clark-led matchup delivers, then what's the long-term value? Streaming platforms survive on consistency. They need to guarantee advertisers and sponsors that every game is worth their dollars. Right now, the WNBA can't make that promise. It's not just about raw numbers either. The optics are brutal. ESPN bragging about record highs, only for the truth to leak out weeks later that most games are drawing dismal figures, creates distrust. Fans feel misled, advertisers feel duped, and networks look foolish for buying into hype. In the cutthroat world of media rights, perception matters almost as much as reality. If a product looks unstable, sponsors will pull back. That hesitation snowballs, making the product even less valuable when contracts come up for renewal. And here's where the real danger lies. The WNBA's current deals aren't permanent. They expire, they get renegotiated, and when that happens, the numbers will speak louder than any press release. If the league can't guarantee 1 million+ viewers on a consistent basis, the networks will either slash the value of their bids or walk away entirely. Imagine the headlines if ESPN decided to cut its coverage, or if Amazon quietly pulled out. That would send shockwaves through the sports world and shatter the image of a league supposedly on the rise. The truth is simple. The WNBA's survival at this level depends on television dollars, and those dollars are only safe as long as networks believe the product is stable. But stability is the one thing this league has failed to prove. So the question isn't just whether ratings can rebound, it's whether networks still believe the WNBA is worth betting on at all. When you break down why the WNBA has landed in such dangerous territory, it all comes back to one unavoidable truth. The league has built its entire brand around a single superstar. Caitlin Clark's arrival was hailed as a turning point, and for a brief moment, it really was. Her games broke viewership records, packed arenas, and drew in casual fans who had never tuned in before. But that kind of spotlight cuts both ways. By leaning so heavily on one player to carry the entire league's popularity, the WNBA created a situation where her absence feels like a total collapse. That dependency is not only unhealthy, it's unsustainable. Compare this to the NBA in its early years. Yes, stars like Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and later Michael Jordan fueled growth, but the league made sure to spread the spotlight. Rivalries were built, storylines expanded, and multiple stars became household names. So even when Jordan stepped away for his baseball stint, the NBA didn't fall apart. The WNBA, by contrast, has placed nearly all of its growth narrative on Clark's shoulders. Networks promoted her every move. Ticket sales were tied to her schedule, and broadcasters constantly framed her as the must-watch figure. That strategy worked until it didn't. The fallout is now visible everywhere. When fans learned she wouldn't be returning this season due to injury, the buzz evaporated almost overnight. Games without her drew laughably low ratings, some not even breaking six figures in viewership. Attendance dipped in cities that had sold out just weeks before. The feverish excitement around the Caitlin Clark effect transformed into a painful reminder that without her, the WNBA simply doesn't command national interest. This isn't Clark's fault. She did her job by bringing energy and eyes to the sport. The failure lies with league leadership, who didn't take advantage of the moment to elevate other stars and create broader narratives. Instead, the league doubled down on divisive rivalries, pitting Clark against Angel Reese or hyping up tension with veterans like Diana Taurasi. Those headlines may have sparked drama on social media, but they didn't translate into long-term stability. Why? Because fans were still only showing up for Clark. Once she disappeared, so did the rivalries. Nobody was sticking around to watch Reese's Chicago Sky without her on the court. And nobody was buying into the idea that A'ja Wilson alone could hold national attention. This Star Alliance problem is precisely what makes TV partners nervous. Sports leagues survive by creating a web of stories and stars so that one injury or controversy doesn't tank the product. If the NFL crumbles without Patrick Mahomes, or if the NBA collapses when LeBron retires, that's a failure of leadership. And right now, the WNBA is living through exactly that nightmare scenario. The bigger problem? This collapse isn't just about the present, it's about the future. If the league can't prove it has staying power beyond Caitlin Clark, why would networks or sponsors gamble on multi-year rights deals that may evaporate the second she's off the court? The financial side of this collapse is where the danger becomes even more alarming. Broadcast partners don't just provide exposure, they provide the money that keeps leagues afloat. Those rights deals pay for marketing campaigns, player salaries, arena costs, and all the behind-the-scenes operations that fans rarely see. Without strong television revenue, the WNBA would have to rely almost entirely on ticket sales and merchandise, both of which are already showing cracks. And with ratings falling into record lows, networks now have leverage to either slash their payments or walk away entirely. Look at how ESPN positioned itself earlier in the season. They rolled out graphics about record-breaking games, highlighted the supposed rise of women's sports, and plastered Caitlin Clark's highlights across every platform. For a while, the story looked good, but advertisers don't care about isolated moments. They care about averages. When the average WNBA game outside of Clark's appearances is barely drawing 100,000 viewers, it becomes nearly impossible to justify premium ad buys. Brands won't pay top dollar for commercials that reach a fraction of the audience they were promised. That means ESPN loses money on the deal, which creates immediate pressure to renegotiate. Amazon's position is no better. They entered the live sports market to prove they could compete with traditional TV, but if WNBA numbers continue to nosedive, they risk embarrassing themselves with weak engagement metrics. Every low-performing broadcast makes it harder for Amazon to convince advertisers that streaming sports is a viable alternative to cable. In this case, the WNBA becomes a liability rather than an asset. And make no mistake, Amazon has no problem cutting ties with underperforming projects. If the league fails to deliver consistency, Amazon could quietly exit. leaving the WNBA with one fewer broadcast partner. Even more troubling is what this means for future negotiations. Rights contracts aren't permanent. They expire and come up for renewal. When that happens, the numbers are laid bare. Executives sit in boardrooms and compare the return on investment. If the WNBA's viewership looks like a roller coaster, why would anyone offer big money? They might still agree to cover games, but at a fraction of the current price. That would devastate the league's finances, forcing team owners to cut costs, players to accept lower salaries, and the league office to scale back its already thin resources. This domino effect could spiral quickly. Without TV money, sponsorships dry up. Without sponsors, marketing budgets collapse. Without marketing, attendance shrinks even further. And once fans stop believing the league has staying power, the entire structure risks imploding. Kathy Engelbert has spent years insisting that women's BASKET/BALL is on the rise. But these financial realities tell another story. Networks and sponsors don't invest in slogans, they invest in stability. And right now, stability is the one thing the WNBA cannot prove. But what happens if one of these networks actually pulls out? The fallout wouldn't just hurt the WNBA. Bottom line, it could permanently shatter its credibility. If a major network were to pull out of its deal with the WNBA, the ripple effects would be catastrophic. First, the immediate financial shortfall would send shockwaves through the league office. Those television checks are not optional bonuses. They are the backbone of the WNBA's entire budget. Losing or even drastically reducing that revenue would mean tough decisions almost overnight. Player salaries, which have already been a point of contention, could be frozen or even cut. Teams that operate on razor-thin margins could struggle to stay afloat, creating whispers of contraction or relocation. And if players feel the league isn't financially stable, some of the biggest names could opt to play overseas, where contracts are guaranteed and money flows more freely. The second ripple effect would hit credibility. For years, the WNBA has fought to prove it deserves equal footing with other professional sports leagues. Securing broadcast deals with Disney, ESPN, and Amazon was its biggest victory. Symbolic proof that women's basketball had finally arrived. If one of those giants backs out, the narrative crumbles. Suddenly, the WNBA looks less like a growing juggernaut and more like a shaky experiment that failed to deliver. This perception shift could undo years of branding efforts and make it nearly impossible to regain momentum. Big brands like Nike, Gatorade, and State Farm invest not just in players, but in the league as a whole, because they believe their ads will be seen by millions across broadcast platforms. Without those platforms, the math changes instantly. A campaign that once had nationwide reach suddenly looks like a niche investment with little payoff. Sponsors don't stay loyal out of kindness. They follow the numbers. And if the numbers show declining audiences, they'll divert their dollars elsewhere. Fans, too, would feel the effects. A reduction in national broadcasts means fewer opportunities to casually stumble onto a game. The WNBA has long struggled with visibility, and TV coverage was the one guaranteed avenue to put its product in front of new audiences. Without it, the league risks shrinking back into obscurity, relying only on hardcore fans who already watch. Growth becomes nearly impossible when the casual audience disappears. Finally, there's the psychological toll on players and coaches. Athletes want to feel like they're part of something bigger, a league that's moving forward, building history, and cementing its place in culture. When they see networks abandoning ship, doubts creep in. Is this league really sustainable? Are we building towards something lasting, or are we just placeholders until the next big thing comes along? Those questions erode morale, and when morale breaks down, performance follows. The truth is simple. Losing television partners wouldn't just hurt the WNBA's bank account. It would unravel the fragile ecosystem holding the league together. Every layer, from players to sponsors to fans, would feel the shock. And the worst part? The damage to credibility might be irreversible. But the real question remains, how close is the league to that breaking point? The warning signs that the WNBA is inching toward that breaking point are already everywhere. The most obvious is the collapse in ratings after Caitlin Clark's injury news went public. For weeks, the league and its broadcast partners kept her status vague, fueling hope that she might return. During that time, fans stayed engaged ticket sales held steady, and ESPN was able to point to inflated averages. But the moment the truth came out that Clark was gone for the season, the numbers nosedived. It wasn't a slow decline, it was a freefall. That kind of instant drop-off isn't just concerning, it's terrifying for TV executives who rely on consistency. Take the Fever's game against the Mystics in Baltimore. Nearly 3,000 ticket holders simply didn't show up. Not because of bad weather, not because of traffic, but because they learned Clark wasn't playing. On television, the same story played out. A matchup that might have drawn over 1 million viewers earlier in the year barely cleared a few 100,000. Contrast that with our headline games like the Fever versus Sky, which pulled nearly 3 million viewers when she recorded a triple-double. The difference is staggering, and it proves the problem beyond debate. This league lives or dies by one player's presence. Another warning sign lies in fan behavior. Angel Reese, one of the most hyped rookies alongside Clark, has seen her own following begin to drift. Early in the season, her games were packaged as must-see TV, especially with ESPN amplifying the so-called rivalry between her and Clark. But when Clark went down, interest in Reese plummeted as well. Her fan base, once considered a potential counterweight to Clark's dominance, isn't sticking around. Chicago Sky games without her or with her on limited minutes are struggling to draw even modest numbers. That suggests fans aren't attaching themselves to teams or the league. They're attaching themselves to individual personalities, and only for as long as those personalities remain relevant. Even ESPN's spin is starting to lose credibility. Earlier in the season, they proudly announced year-over-year growth and record-breaking broadcasts. But those figures were selective, cherry-picked from Clark-led games that skewed the averages. Once the broader numbers leaked, showing most other matchups failing to clear 6 figures in viewership, the narrative unraveled. When fans feel misled, trust evaporates. And when advertisers feel misled, contracts get renegotiated. Neither of those outcomes bodes well for the WNBA's future. Perhaps the clearest red flag is the silence from league leadership. Kathy Engelbert has been vocal in celebrating every minor milestone. Yet when the ratings freefall became undeniable, her tone shifted. The commissioner has avoided addressing the issue head-on, hoping the storm will pass. But executives at Disney and Amazon don't deal in hope. They deal in data. And right now, the data is brutal. If these warning signs continue to pile up, the question won't be whether TV partners lose faith. It'll be when. And once one pulls away, the dominoes will start to fall. If the networks begin pulling back, the WNBA's problems won't just remain behind closed doors in boardrooms. The public will see it, and perception will shift instantly. In sports, perception is almost as important as performance. Once fans believe a league is in decline, that belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. People stop watching, sponsors stop spending, and media coverage dries up. That's exactly the cliff the WNBA is inching toward if its ratings, crisis, and shaky. TV partnerships aren't resolved quickly. The danger is that the league has already overplayed its hand. By promoting narratives of record growth and historic highs, it painted itself into a corner. When those claims are exposed as exaggerated, with most games drawing shockingly low numbers, fans feel betrayed. No one likes being sold a dream that turns out to be smoke and mirrors. This erosion of trust makes it even harder to convince casual fans to come back once they've tuned out. Sports leagues rely on momentum, and the WNBA's momentum is now facing the wrong direction. Consider the players caught in the middle. Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, A'ja Wilson, and others are now expected to carry not just their teams, but the entire league's reputation. That's an impossible burden. Clark herself, already under intense scrutiny, has become both the savior and the scapegoat. When she plays, she elevates the league. When she's gone, the collapse is used as proof that the WNBA has no depth. Players shouldn't have to bear the responsibility of keeping a billion-dollar industry alive, yet the current system has left them with no choice. The backlash on social media only makes things worse. Fans loyal to Clark call out the league for mismanaging her, while critics accuse the WNBA of favoritism and uneven promotion. Every viral post becomes another crack in the foundation, reinforcing the idea that the league is unstable. And instability is the last thing networks want when deciding whether to extend broadcast contracts. If the online conversation is dominated by chaos and fingerpointing, executives will see risk, not opportunity. Even worse, rivals in the sports world are circling. The LPGA, NCAA women's basketball, and even international leagues are watching closely. If the WNBA stumbles, those organizations are ready to scoop up disillusioned fans and players. College basketball, in particular, has proven it can outdraw the professional league. With March Madness pulling in millions more viewers than most WNBA playoff games, that comparison alone makes the WNBA look fragile in the eyes of advertisers. Why pour money into a struggling product when college sports deliver bigger, more consistent audiences? All of this points to a stark reality. The WNBA is at a crossroads. Either it restructures its marketing, diversifies its stars, and rebuilds trust with fans and sponsors. Or it risks being remembered as a league that peaked too soon and collapsed. Under its own hype, and the most pressing issue still, lingers what happens when the TV rights come up for renewal and the numbers can't justify the price tag. The looming renegotiation of television rights may be the WNBA's most decisive moment in decades. When networks like ESPN, Disney, and Amazon sit down to look at the raw numbers, sentiment and spin won't matter. Cold, hard data will. If those numbers show that the majority of WNBA games struggle to attract even 100,000 viewers, while only Caitlin Clark-led matchups break through the ceiling, the networks will be in no mood to hand out premium contracts. At best, they'll offer reduced deals. At worst, they'll walk away altogether, forcing the league to scramble for coverage on smaller, less influential platforms. Either scenario would send a devastating message that the WNBA is not strong enough to stand on its own. The danger isn't just financial. Losing a major broadcast partner carries enormous symbolic weight. Television rights aren't only about money, they are about legitimacy. Having games aired on ESPN or Amazon Prime signals to fans and sponsors that this league matters, that it has earned a place in the mainstream sports landscape. If those games get pushed to obscure networks or buried in late-night time slots, the perception instantly changes. What was once presented as a league on the rise will be seen as a product that couldn't sustain its own hype. And in the entertainment business, perception often determines survival. Sponsors, always attuned to public perception, will not hesitate to pull back. Companies like Nike, Gatorade, and State Farm don't just pay to be associated with the WNBA. They pay for visibility. If broadcasts reach smaller audiences on weaker networks, that visibility shrinks, and so does the incentive to invest. Even if those companies maintain player endorsements, their willingness to back the league as a whole will fade. That lack of corporate support would further choke the WNBA's ability to market itself, creating a vicious cycle of declining exposure and declining interest. For the players, the stakes couldn't be higher. Many have fought for years for higher salaries, better facilities, and greater respect, pointing to rising attendance and viewership as justification. But if TV contracts shrink, owners will argue there simply isn't enough money to meet those demands. Instead of progress, players could face wage stagnation or even cuts. Worse, stars may be forced once again to look overseas for financial security. Just when it seemed the WNBA was finally becoming a sustainable home for women's basketball. And then there's the fans. If coverage is reduced, casual audiences, the ones critical for long-term growth, will simply move on. Without easy access to games on major platforms, the WNBA risks shrinking into a niche followed only by that kind of contraction is nearly impossible to reverse. The truth is stark. The future of the WNBA's television rights isn't just another negotiation, it's a test of survival. If the league can't prove it has staying power beyond a single superstar, the next contract could mark the beginning of its decline rather than its rise, which leaves one haunting question. Is the WNBA prepared for that reality, or is it already too late?